Welcome to Harrowing Tales, where the most chilling stories await you. Tonight, I'll guide you through a tale that might just linger in your mind long after the lights go out. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share where you're watching from and the time. It's always darkest before dawn, isn't it? Now, get comfortable, relax, and let's step into the shadows together. It was a night like no other. The rain came down in torrents, relentless and icy, hammering against the windshield of Paul's car. He squinted through the wipers, their frantic rhythm barely making a dent in the downpour. The road stretched endlessly ahead, cloaked in darkness, with only the faint beams of his headlights cutting through the void. The GPS had stopped working an hour ago, its screen frozen on a blank map. His phone had no signal. He cursed under his breath, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Somewhere, out in this vast wilderness, was his destination, a small town called Stillwater, where a job interview awaited him the next morning. But now, lost and alone, Paul wasn't sure he'd ever get there. The rain grew heavier, a deafening roar against the car's roof. The road began to twist and turn sharply, flanked by dense trees that seemed to close in with every mile. He slowed the car, his heart pounding as the tires slipped on the slick asphalt. And then, the lights appeared, dim and flickering, like fireflies in the distance. Paul's chest tightened with a mixture of relief and unease. A building emerged from the darkness, a large, old-fashioned inn with a wide porch and warm light spilling from its windows. The sign above the door swayed in the wind, its faded lettering barely legible, the Hollow Hearth Inn. Paul hesitated. The place looked out of time, as if it had been plucked from another era. But with no other shelter in sight, he pulled into the gravel driveway and parked. The moment he stepped out of the car, the storm seemed to grow quieter, as though muffled by the inn's presence. Water dripped from his jacket as he climbed the creaking steps to the front door. He knocked once, then twice, before the heavy wooden door creaked open. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall and thin, his face gaunt but not unfriendly. His clothes were strange, an old-fashioned suit with a high collar and a waistcoat. The man smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Welcome," he said, his voice smooth and low. "You must be seeking shelter from the storm. Please, come in." Paul hesitated, but the warm light spilling from inside was too inviting to resist. He stepped over the threshold, and the door closed behind him with a soft but final thud. The lobby was unsettling. At first glance, it seemed cozy. A crackling fire burned in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. Plush armchairs sat arranged around a low table, and the scent of wood polish and something faintly sweet lingered in the air. But then Paul noticed the oddities. The grandfather clock in the corner was frozen, its hands stuck at midnight. Every wall bore the same painting, a dark forest under a crescent moon, identical in every detail. And though the fire roared, the room felt cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones. "Your room is ready," the man said, gesturing toward a staircase at the far end of the lobby. "I didn't even book a room," Paul replied, forcing a nervous laugh. The man's smile widened. "We've been expecting you." Paul felt a chill run down his spine, but he pushed it aside. It was just a stormy night, and he was overthinking. He followed the man up the stairs, each step creaking loudly in the silence. At the top, the man gestured to a door at the end of the hall. "Room 13, he said. "The best room in the house. Rest well." Paul opened the door and stepped inside. The room was simple, a bed, a nightstand, a wardrobe, but something about it felt wrong. The air was heavy, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. And when Paul turned to thank the man, he was gone. The hallway was empty. Paul shut the door and locked it, trying to shake off the unease creeping into his chest. He changed into dry clothes, set his phone on the nightstand, and collapsed onto the bed. But sleep wouldn't come. The storm outside seemed to have vanished, leaving a silence so profound it pressed against his ears. And then, a sound. Faint. Subtle. Whispering. Paul sat up, his breath hitching. It was coming from the wardrobe, a low, murmuring voice, too quiet to understand. "Hello," he called, his voice trembling. The whispering stopped. Paul stared at the wardrobe, his heart pounding. Slowly, he got out of bed and approached it, his fingers trembling as they gripped the handle. He yanked the door open. Empty. He exhaled shakily and closed it again. But as he turned back toward the bed, he froze. There, on the mirror above the dresser, were words written in condensation. "You shouldn't have come." Paul's heart thundered in his chest. He stepped back, his legs trembling as his gaze locked onto the words smeared across the glass. The condensation lingered, as if something warm, something alive, had breathed directly onto the mirror. His first instinct was to leave the room, to grab his keys and drive as far away from the hollow hearth as possible. But his feet refused to move. And then, a knock. It was soft at first, barely audible. Knock. 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 Paul's breath caught in his throat. The sound wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from the wardrobe. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling. "No, no, no." The knock came again, louder this time, reverberating through the room. Paul backed away, his hands clutching at the edges of the bed. And then the wardrobe door creaked open. Just a crack. The air grew colder, and the faint scent of earth, damp and decayed, wafted out. Shadows seemed to spill from within, curling across the floor like smoke. Paul wanted to scream, but the sound lodged in his throat. His mind raced, every nerve screaming at him to run, but his body was frozen, paralyzed by the oppressive dread that now filled the room. And then he saw it. A hand. Pale, thin, and unnaturally long, its fingers curled around the edge of the wardrobe door. The skin was mottled, like something that had been buried and unearthed too soon. The hand slid upward, gripping the door tightly. Then a face emerged. It wasn't human. Hollow eyes stared back at Paul, black pits that seemed to absorb the dim light of the room. The mouth was wide, impossibly wide, splitting the face in a grotesque grin that revealed rows of jagged, yellow teeth. "You shouldn't have stayed," it whispered. The voice was layered, as though multiple people were speaking at once, their tones overlapping in a discordant, chilling harmony. Paul stumbled back, finally finding the strength to move. He bolted for the door, fumbling with the lock, his shaking hands slipping against the cold metal. Behind him, the wardrobe creaked fully open. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate. The creature was coming. Paul wrenched the door open and ran into the hallway. The air here was different, thick, suffocating. The walls seemed closer, the dim lights flickering erratically. He sprinted toward the staircase, his footfalls echoing in the oppressive silence. But when he reached the bottom of the stairs, he stopped. The lobby was gone. In its place was a long, dark corridor, lined with countless doors. Each one was slightly ajar, and from each room came faint whispers, indistinct, but urgent, as if pleading with him. "Help us. Don't listen. Turn back." Paul's chest heaved as panic overtook him. The corridor stretched endlessly, the whispers growing louder, more frantic. His legs moved on their own, carrying him forward even as his mind screamed for him to stop. The doors creaked open wider as he passed, and from the corners of his eyes, he saw figures. People. Their faces were twisted in agony, their eyes wide with terror. Some reached out to him, their fingers brushing against his arms, cold and clammy. "Please," one of them gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't let it take you." Paul broke into a run, tears streaming down his face. The whispers turned to wails, a cacophony of despair that filled the corridor. Ahead, a single door stood closed. Unlike the others, it bore no markings. No cracks of light seeped from its edges. And yet, Paul knew. It was waiting for him. He reached the door, his trembling hand hovering over the handle. Behind him, the wailing figures emerged from their rooms, their hands outstretched, their mouths open in silent screams. Paul closed his eyes and turned the handle. The door swung open, revealing nothing but darkness. And then, he fell. Paul's body plunged into the abyss, weightless and untethered. The darkness around him was suffocating, pressing against his skin like a heavy, cold fog. He couldn't tell if he was falling for seconds or hours. Time had lost all meaning. The whispers were still there, distant and faint, but they seemed to move with him, growing louder as he descended. And then, he landed. The impact wasn't hard. It was as if he had been gently placed down, though the surface beneath him was cold and damp. Paul opened his eyes, but the darkness remained, impenetrable and infinite. "Where am I?" he whispered, his voice trembling. A faint light flickered in the distance, pale and sickly, like the glow of a dying candle. It barely illuminated his surroundings, but it was enough to see the ground, a slick, black surface that seemed to glisten as if wet. The air was heavy with the stench of decay. Paul forced himself to stand, his legs shaky and weak. He took a cautious step toward the light, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. "Hello," he called out, his voice swallowed by the void. The whispers returned, louder now, coming from every direction. "Turn back. Keep moving. Don't stop." Paul's chest tightened. The voices contradicted one another, pulling him in every direction at once. But the light, faint as it was, felt like the only anchor in this nightmare. He moved toward it, his pace quickening. As he drew closer, the light began to take shape, revealing a figure standing motionless. It was a woman. Her back was to him, her hair long and matted, hanging in tangled strands down her pale, gaunt frame. She wore a tattered dress that clung to her bony shoulders, and her arms hung limply at her sides. "Miss?" Paul called out, his voice hesitant. The woman didn't move. Paul stepped closer, his heart pounding. "Are you okay?" Her head tilted slightly, the movement slow and unnatural, like a puppet on frayed strings. Paul stopped, every instinct screaming at him to turn and run. But before he could move, she spoke. "You shouldn't be here." Her voice was soft, almost kind, but it carried an undertone of something wrong. Something that sent chills racing down his spine. I didn't mean to," Paul stammered. I don't even know where I am." The woman turned. Her face was obscured, shrouded in shadows despite the dim light that surrounded her. But her eyes, two hollow, black voids, locked onto Paul's. "You were chosen," she whispered. Paul stepped back, his breath quickening. "Chosen for what?" She took a step forward, her movements disjointed, as if her joints didn't bend the way they should. "For him," she said, her voice barely audible. Paul stumbled, his feet slipping on the wet ground. "Who's him? What do you mean?" The woman tilted her head again, and a slow, twisted smile spread across her face. "You'll see." The light flickered, and suddenly, Paul was no longer alone. Figures emerged from the darkness, dozens of them, their bodies contorted and broken. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow, their mouths frozen in silent screams. They surrounded him, their movements jerky and unnatural, closing in from every side. Paul's pulse thundered in his ears. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice cracking. The figures didn't stop. Their whispers grew louder, merging into a single, deafening chant. "You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't have come." The woman raised her hand, pointing past Paul, into the darkness. He turned, his breath hitching as he saw what she was pointing at. The light had faded, revealing a massive, looming shadow. It wasn't human. It wasn't even close. The creature towered over him, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, glowed faintly, their light cold and unfeeling. The whispers fell silent. The creature's mouth opened, a gaping void that seemed to pull the very air from the room. Paul's legs gave out, and he collapsed to his knees. The woman's voice echoed in his mind, soft and haunting. "He's been waiting for you." The creature lunged. And then, nothing. Paul awoke in his bed, drenched in sweat. The room was quiet, the morning light streaming through the curtains. But as he sat up, his breath still ragged, he noticed something on the bedside table. A single, blackened key. And the faint sound of whispers, lingering in the air. Paul stared at the key, his fingers trembling as he reached for it. The metal felt ice cold, as if it had been sitting in a frozen void. It was heavy, far heavier than it looked, and etched with intricate markings that seemed to shift and writhe when he tried to focus on them. The whispers grew louder, faint and indistinct, as though they were just beyond the walls of his room. Paul flinched, jerking his hand away from the key. This isn't real," he muttered, his voice hoarse. He glanced around his room, desperate for some semblance of normalcy. The posters on the wall, the cluttered desk, the pile of laundry in the corner, It was all familiar. Yet everything felt wrong. The shadows seemed deeper. The light from the window felt pale and lifeless. And the whispers, they wouldn't stop. Paul. He froze. The voice was clearer now, rising above the murmurs. It was soft, almost tender, but it carried a weight that made his chest tighten. He turned slowly, his eyes locking on the mirror across the room. His reflection stared back at him, pale and wide-eyed, his chest rising and falling with rapid, shallow breaths. But then, the reflection smiled. Paul didn't. The smile spread unnaturally wide, the corners of the reflection's mouth stretching far beyond what was humanly possible. Paul, it whispered again, though its lips didn't move. He scrambled backward, his foot catching on the edge of the bed. The reflection leaned closer, pressing its hands against the glass as if trying to push through. The surface rippled like water. "You can't run," it said, its voice echoing in Paul's mind. With a sharp crack, the mirror shattered, the sound piercing through the room. Paul shielded his face, shards of glass raining down around him. When he looked again, the mirror was whole, pristine, as if nothing had happened. The whispers were gone. For a moment, the room was silent. Paul's heart pounded in his chest, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. He clenched his fists, trying to steady himself. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the key on his bedside table said otherwise. Days passed, but Paul couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The whispers came and went, faint and fleeting, but always there, just at the edge of his hearing. He started seeing things, shadows moving where they shouldn't, faint figures lingering in his peripheral vision. Sleep became impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back in the tunnel, the whispers surrounding him, the figure looming closer. The key remained untouched on the table, though it seemed to taunt him, its dark surface glinting in the dim light. One night, unable to take it any longer, Paul grabbed the key and stuffed it into a drawer. But when he turned around, it was back on the table. The markings seemed to glow faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. A voice echoed in his mind. "Come back." Paul's knees buckled, and he sank to the floor, clutching his head. "No," he whispered. "Leave me alone." But the voice didn't relent. "You have been chosen. There is no escape." Tears streamed down his face as the whispers grew louder, overlapping, their weight pressing down on him like a tidal wave. "Come back." The next morning, Paul awoke to find the key gone. For the first time in days, the whispers were silent. The air felt lighter, the sunlight warmer. It was over. Or so he thought. That night, as he lay in bed, the darkness in the room seemed to grow deeper. The faint sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Paul sat up, his body tense. "Hello," he called out, his voice barely above a whisper. The footsteps stopped. The door creaked open. And there, standing in the doorway, was the woman from the tunnel. Her hollow eyes stared into his, and a twisted smile spread across her face. "You can't escape," she said. The whispers returned, louder than ever, as the shadows in the room came alive, closing in around him. The last thing Paul saw before the darkness consumed him was the blackened key, clutched in her skeletal hand. When Paul's friends reported him missing, the police found no signs of a struggle. His room was untouched, his belongings undisturbed. The only clue was a single, rusted key lying on his bedside table, and the faint sound of whispers lingering in the air. In the weeks following Paul's disappearance, his friends couldn't shake the unease that lingered in the air. Sarah, his closest confidant, was particularly haunted by the mystery. She had been the one he confided in about the nightmares, the whispers, and the key. Now, she couldn't help but feel like she had missed something, a chance to help him before it was too late. The key was taken as evidence by the authorities, but no fingerprints, no marks, nothing significant was found on it. It was just a rusted, ordinary key, at least, that's what they said. Sarah knew better. She'd seen Paul's fear, his growing paranoia. And then there was the whispering. She hadn't mentioned it to anyone else, but she had started hearing them too. Late one night, Sarah sat in her room, surrounded by piles of articles, old photographs, and hastily scribbled notes. She had dived deep into the history of the area, looking for anything that might explain the strange events surrounding Paul. Her research led her to a story buried deep in the town's archives, one about an old train line that had been abandoned over a century ago. According to the records, construction on the railway tunnel had halted after a series of unexplained accidents. Workers reported hearing voices, seeing apparitions, and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread while inside the tunnel. The final straw came when a collapse trapped several workers inside. Their bodies were never recovered. Shortly after, the company sealed the tunnel, and it was left to decay. But the stories didn't stop. Over the years, there were whispers of strange disappearances, of people entering the forest and never returning. And then there was the legend of the key. A foreman who survived the collapse claimed that the key was cursed, a conduit to another realm. He warned that anyone who touched it would be marked, claimed by the spirits trapped within the tunnel. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the final line of the foreman's account. The key chooses its bearer, and once chosen, there is no escape. The next night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent. "Help us. Come back." Her room felt suffocating, the shadows pressing against her like a living, breathing entity. She tried to ignore it, to push the voices away. But then she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. It was the faint creak of a door opening. Her bedroom door. Sarah froze, her heart pounding. She turned slowly, her eyes straining to see in the darkness. The door was ajar, and standing in the hallway was a figure. At first, she thought it was Paul. But as the figure stepped into the pale moonlight filtering through the window, she saw that it wasn't him. It was the woman from the tunnel. Her hollow eyes bored into Sarah's, her twisted smile widening as she raised her hand. In her palm was the key. "You've been chosen," the woman said, her voice a chorus of whispers. Sarah woke with a start, gasping for air. It had to be a nightmare. But when she looked at her bedside table, she saw it, the key, sitting there as if it had always been. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, the cold metal sending a shiver up her spine. As she held it, the whispers grew louder, clearer. This time, she could understand them. "Save us. Set us free." And then, one voice rose above the others. "Sarah, it's Paul." Her breath hitched. Paul? Is that you? Help me, the voice pleaded. You have to come back. Please, before it's too late. The room spun, and Sarah felt herself falling, the whispers enveloping her like a cold, suffocating blanket. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer in her bedroom. She was standing at the mouth of the tunnel. The iron gates were open, the darkness inside beckoning her. The key in her hand pulsed, its markings glowing faintly. Save us, the whispers urged. Summoning every ounce of courage, Sarah stepped forward, the cold air of the tunnel wrapping around her like a shroud. She didn't know what awaited her inside. But she couldn't turn back now. Not with Paul's voice guiding her deeper into the shadows. And as the whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls, Sarah realized one terrifying truth. The tunnel wasn't just a place. It was alive. And it was hungry. The deeper Sarah ventured into the tunnel, the colder and darker it became. Her flashlight flickered weakly, barely piercing the thick, oppressive blackness that seemed to press against her from all sides. The air was heavy, carrying a faint metallic tang, and her every footstep echoed eerily, as though the tunnel itself was mocking her. Paul, she called, her voice trembling. The name barely left her lips before it was swallowed by the whispers. Save us, they repeated, growing louder, more insistent. Suddenly, her flashlight flickered violently, then went out completely. Sarah's breath caught as she was plunged into absolute darkness. Panic clawed at her chest. She fumbled for her phone, but the screen wouldn't turn on. It was as if the tunnel had drained every source of light, every semblance of safety. And then, she heard it. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, and not her own. Who's there? She demanded, her voice cracking. Paul? Is it you? No answer came, only the footsteps drawing closer. Sarah backed up against the cold, damp wall, clutching the key tightly in her hand. The metal felt warm now, almost pulsing, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, a voice. You shouldn't have come back. It was low, guttural, and distorted. Sarah's heart pounded as a faint glow appeared in the distance. The light grew brighter, revealing a figure shrouded in shadows. Its movements were unnatural, jerky, as if it were being pulled forward by unseen strings. Sarah pressed herself harder against the wall, her trembling hand raising the key instinctively. The figure stopped a few feet away, its face obscured by the darkness. But its voice, cold and hollow, rang clear. The key belongs to us. Before Sarah could respond, the figure lunged, and the whispers erupted into a deafening roar. She screamed, clutching the key tighter as the air around her seemed to shatter like glass. The tunnel warped, its walls rippling and twisting as though it were alive. Paul, she cried out, tears streaming down her face. Where are you? A hand reached out from the darkness, grasping hers. It was warm, familiar. Sarah, it's me. Paul's voice was frantic. You have to leave. Now. She turned, and there he was, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. But before she could move, shadowy tendrils coiled around his body, dragging him back into the darkness. Sarah, he screamed. Don't let go of the key. It's the only way to. His voice was cut off, replaced by the relentless whispers. No! Sarah shouted, her voice echoing through the tunnel. She charged forward, swinging the key wildly at the tendrils, which recoiled with an ear-piercing screech. The glow from the key intensified, illuminating the tunnel in an otherworldly light. For the first time, Sarah saw them, the spirits trapped within the walls. Their faces were twisted in agony, their mouths open in silent screams. They reached out to her, their translucent hands grasping for the key. "Set us free," they whispered. "But beware, the price." The tunnel trembled violently, chunks of stone falling from the ceiling. Sarah knew she had to act fast. Holding the key aloft, she shouted, "How do I free you?" The whispers merged into one clear voice. "Unlock the gate." "What gate?" she demanded. The floor beneath her shifted, revealing a massive iron door embedded in the ground. Its surface was etched with the same strange markings as the key, glowing faintly in the dim light. Sarah hesitated. The door radiated an ominous energy, as though whatever lay beneath it was far worse than the horrors of the tunnel. "Do it," the voices urged. "Release us." Her hands shook as she knelt and inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a loud click, and the door began to creak open. A rush of cold air erupted from the void below, carrying with it the sound of screams, endless, bone-chilling screams. The spirits swirled around her, their faces contorting with relief and anguish. "We are free," they whispered, their forms dissipating into the air. But as the last spirit vanished, Sarah realized her mistake. The whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more menacing, until they were a cacophony of malevolent laughter. The ground beneath her feet gave way, and she fell into the abyss. Sarah awoke in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with rusty chains, and the air reeked of decay. She tried to move, but her body felt heavy, her limbs bound by an invisible force. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was the woman from her nightmares, her hollow eyes glinting with malice. "You've taken their place," the woman said, her voice a chilling echo. "The key chooses its bearer, and now, you belong to the tunnel." Sarah's scream echoed endlessly, swallowed by the darkness. And far above, in the quiet town of Ravenswood, the tunnel remained silent once more, waiting for its next victim. The whispers grew louder, more menacing, until they were a cacophony of malevolent laughter. The ground beneath her feet gave way, and she fell into the abyss. Sarah awoke in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with rusty chains, and the air reeked of decay. She tried to move, but her body felt heavy, her limbs bound by an invisible force. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was the woman from her nightmares, her hollow eyes glinting with malice. "You've taken their place," the woman said, her voice a chilling echo. "The key chooses its bearer, and now, you belong to the tunnel." Sarah's scream echoed endlessly, swallowed by the darkness. And far above, in the quiet town of Ravenswood, the tunnel remained silent once more, waiting for its next victim. The fall seemed to last an eternity, the screams of the released spirits echoing in her ears as she plummeted into the unknown. When she finally landed, the impact knocked the breath from her lungs. She lay gasping, disoriented, in a small, stone chamber. The air was thick with the stench of damp earth and something far more sinister, a cloying sweetness that made her stomach churn. Groaning, Sarah tried to sit up, but her body ached as if it had been broken. She looked around, her eyes slowly adjusting to the dim light filtering through cracks in the stone ceiling. The chamber was roughly circular, its walls slick with moisture. Chains hung from the ceiling, some ending in rusty hooks that seemed designed to tear flesh. A single, flickering torch cast long, dancing shadows that writhed and twisted like grotesque puppets. Suddenly, a pair of eyes gleamed in the darkness. They were large, black, and filled with an unsettling intelligence. The eyes belonged to the woman from her nightmares, her face pale and gaunt, her lips drawn back in a chilling smile. She glided towards Sarah, her movements silent and predatory. "Welcome," the woman hissed, her voice a raspy whisper. "To your new home." Terror seized Sarah. She tried to scream, but only a strangled gurgle escaped her throat. The woman reached out, her long, skeletal fingers brushing against Sarah's cheek. A jolt of icy pain shot through her, and she felt a strange energy draining from her, seeping into the woman's touch. "You have disturbed their rest," the woman continued, her voice a low, seductive purr. "Freed them from their eternal torment. Now, you will pay the price." Sarah's vision blurred. She could feel the woman's power growing, her presence filling the chamber with a suffocating dread. The air grew heavy, the torchlight flickering erratically, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed around them. "You will become one of us," the woman whispered, her breath hot against Sarah's ear. "Bound to this place, an eternal prisoner of the tunnel." Sarah's eyes widened in horror. She thrashed against the invisible bonds that held her captive, but it was useless. The woman's grip tightened, and Sarah felt a cold, suffocating darkness enveloping her. As consciousness slipped away, Sarah heard a low, guttural chuckle echoing through the chamber. "The tunnel always collects its due," the woman hissed, her voice fading into the abyss. And in the depths of the earth, Sarah's screams joined the chorus of the damned, lost forever in the echoing silence of the tunnel. The chilling chuckle echoed through the chamber, the sound reverberating through Sarah's fading senses. As consciousness slipped away, she felt a cold, suffocating darkness enveloping her. The air grew thick with the stench of decay and something far more sinister, a cloying sweetness that reminded her of blood. When Sarah regained consciousness, the chamber was shrouded in an eerie, greenish glow. The torch had long since extinguished, replaced by an unnatural light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The woman was gone, vanished without a trace. But Sarah was no longer alone. Grotesque figures emerged from the shadows, their forms flickering and distorted. They were the spirits, but they were no longer the tormented souls she had encountered in the tunnel. Their eyes, once filled with anguish, now burned with an unnatural light, their faces contorted in grotesque smiles. "Welcome," one of the spirits rasped, its voice a chilling whisper. "To our domain." Sarah recoiled in horror, her heart pounding against her ribs. She tried to scream, to fight against the invisible forces that held her captive, but her voice was trapped in her throat. The spirits glided towards her, their movements silent and predatory. She noticed a strange change in her own body. A tingling sensation spread through her limbs, and a cold, metallic taste filled her mouth. She felt a foreign presence within her, a dark energy that was slowly consuming her. The spirits circled her, their eyes fixed on her with a chilling intensity. You have disturbed our slumber," another spirit hissed. "Now, you will serve us." Terror seized Sarah. She desperately searched for a way to escape, but the chamber offered no escape. The walls were solid, the air thick with the stench of decay and despair. She was trapped, a prisoner in this subterranean hell. As the spirits drew closer, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm descend upon her. The fear that had consumed her was replaced by an unsettling sense of acceptance. The foreign energy within her surged, coursing through her veins like icy fire. "Join us," the spirits chanted, their voices merging into a single, hypnotic hum. "Embrace the darkness." Sarah closed her eyes, the whispers of the spirits washing over her. The foreign energy within her intensified, twisting and contorting her mind and body. She felt herself changing, becoming something else, something less human. A chilling smile spread across her face, mirroring the grotesque grins of the spirits. "I embrace the darkness," she whispered, her voice a low, guttural growl. The spirits erupted in a chorus of triumphant laughter. Sarah had become one of them, another soul trapped within the eternal darkness of the tunnel, forever bound to the horrors that lurked beneath the surface. And in the quiet town of Ravenswood, the tunnel remained silent, its depths concealing the chilling secret of Sarah's transformation, waiting for its next unsuspecting victim to venture into the abyss. The transformation was excruciating. Sarah felt her bones shift, her muscles contort, her very essence being twisted and reshaped. The pain was unbearable, but it was also strangely exhilarating. It was as if she were shedding her mortal coil, shedding the limitations of her human form. When the agony finally subsided, she opened her eyes. The chamber was bathed in an eerie, emerald glow, the spirits hovering around her, their faces contorted in grotesque admiration. Her reflection in the damp stone wall sent a shiver down her spine. Her eyes were now black, devoid of any warmth or life. Her skin had paled, taking on a sickly, greenish hue. Her hair, once a vibrant brown, had turned a stark, unnatural white. But the most terrifying change was in her face. Her lips were drawn back in a perpetual sneer, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. The spirits, their voices a chorus of chilling whispers, guided her towards the edge of the chamber. A narrow passage, barely wide enough for her to squeeze through, snaked into the depths of the earth. "Explore," one of the spirits hissed, its voice a raspy whisper. "Bring back new souls to join us." Sarah, now a creature of the darkness, slithered through the passage, her movements fluid and predatory. She was no longer human, but something else entirely. A creature of the abyss, born from the despair and suffering of the damned. The tunnel stretched on for what seemed like eternity, its walls slick with moisture and oozing with a strange, phosphorescent slime. Sarah navigated through the labyrinthine passages with an unnatural grace, her senses heightened, her hearing attuned to the faintest sound. She encountered other creatures in the depths, grotesque beings born from the nightmares of those who had ventured into the tunnel before. Some were monstrous, their forms twisted and deformed by the dark magic that permeated the earth. Others were more subtle, appearing as innocuous shadows that whispered temptations in the minds of the unwary. Sarah, however, was different. She was a hunter, a predator, driven by an insatiable hunger for souls. She roamed the tunnels, her presence a shadow that chilled the very air. And in the quiet town of Ravenswood, strange occurrences began to happen. People disappeared without a trace. Livestock vanished from their pens. Sleepwalkers wandered into the woods and never returned. A wave of inexplicable fear gripped the town, a chilling dread that lingered in the shadows. The whispers began again, soft at first, then growing louder, more insistent. "The tunnel is hungry," they whispered on the wind, carried on the breath of the damned. "It demands more souls." And as the town trembled on the brink of terror, Sarah, the creature of the abyss, continued her hunt, her laughter echoing through the depths of the earth, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lurked beneath the surface. The whispers grew louder, carried on the chilling winds that seeped from the depths of the earth. They echoed through the streets of Ravenswood, whispering tales of disappearances, of the chilling dread that clung to the shadows. Fear, a palpable entity, began to grip the town. The first to vanish was Old Man Hemmings, a solitary figure who lived on the edge of town. He disappeared without a trace, his cottage left eerily silent, the only sound the mournful chirping of crickets. Then came young Emily, a vibrant girl known for her infectious laughter, who vanished while walking home from school. Panic began to set in. The townsfolk, once a close-knit community, became isolated, their homes barricaded against the unseen threat. Children were forbidden to venture outside after dark, and the once lively streets fell silent, the only sounds the eerie creaking of old houses and the distant howling of the wind. Sheriff Brody, a weathered man with a lifetime of experience in the wilderness, was baffled. He scoured the surrounding woods, searching for any sign of the missing, but found nothing. The ground, usually teeming with life, felt strangely lifeless, the very air heavy with a sense of dread. One night, while patrolling the edge of town, Sheriff Brody heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the depths of the earth. The sound sent shivers down his spine, a primal fear he couldn't explain. He drew his revolver, his eyes darting nervously into the darkness. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall and gaunt, its movements fluid and predatory. Its eyes, black as night, glowed with an unnatural light. Sheriff Brody felt a wave of dizziness wash over him, his senses reeling. The figure glided towards him, its movements silent as a ghost. Before he could react, the figure lunged. Sheriff Brody raised his revolver, firing blindly into the darkness. The shots echoed through the night, but the figure was gone, vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The incident shattered the fragile calm that had descended upon the town. Fear escalated into full-blown terror. No one dared venture outside after nightfall, and the town, once a beacon of warmth and community, became a ghost town, haunted by the whispers of the unseen enemy. Meanwhile, deep within the tunnels, Sarah, the creature of the abyss, watched the town descend into chaos with chilling amusement. She reveled in the fear, in the despair that gripped the hearts of the townsfolk. Each new victim, each soul consumed by the darkness, fueled her power, strengthened her connection to the abyss. She began to experiment, pushing the boundaries of her newfound abilities. She learned to manipulate the shadows, to whisper temptations into the minds of the living, to sow seeds of discord and distrust within the community. The town, once a vibrant tapestry of human life, began to unravel. Friends turned against friends. Neighbors against neighbors. Accusations flew, suspicions festered, and the once harmonious community was torn apart by fear and paranoia. Sheriff Brody, driven by a desperate need to protect his town, began to investigate the supernatural. He consulted with old Mrs. Gable, a woman rumored to possess knowledge of ancient folklore and forgotten legends. Mrs. Gable, her eyes filled with a chilling wisdom, spoke of an ancient evil, a creature born from the darkness, that had been awakened from its slumber. "The tunnel," she rasped, her voice weak and frail. "It has been awakened. Something ancient, something evil, has been released." Sheriff Brody, skeptical at first, began to believe her. He delved into the town's history, searching for any records of past disturbances, of unexplained disappearances. He discovered that the tunnel had been the source of fear and superstition for generations, a place of whispers and shadows, where the line between reality and nightmare blurred. He realized that he was facing an enemy unlike any he had encountered before. This was not a simple criminal, but something ancient, something beyond human comprehension. He knew he had to find a way to stop it, to protect his town from the encroaching darkness. But how could he fight something he didn't understand? How could he defeat an enemy that seemed to exist in the very fabric of reality? As Sheriff Brody grappled with these questions, Sarah, deep within the tunnels, watched with chilling amusement. The game had begun, and she was enjoying every terrifying moment. The town of Ravenswood was hers, and she would savor its descent into oblivion. The whispers continued, growing louder, more insistent, until they became a constant hum, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. And as the town trembled on the brink of destruction, Sarah, the creature of the abyss, awaited the final act, the ultimate consumption, the complete annihilation of the human spirit. Sheriff Brody, haunted by the whispers and the chilling presence of the unseen enemy, began to delve deeper into the town's history. He visited the dusty archives in the town hall, sifting through crumbling documents, searching for any clues, any mention of the tunnel and the horrors that lurked within. He discovered a series of cryptic entries in the town log, dating back centuries. Each entry described a period of unexplained disappearances, of a chilling dread that gripped the town, of whispers on the wind and the eerie glow that emanated from the depths of the earth. One entry, written in a shaky hand, spoke of an ancient ritual, a desperate attempt to contain the darkness. A group of elders, guided by a woman with eyes like molten gold, had sealed the entrance to the tunnel with a series of powerful words, chanting incantations that echoed through the earth. The ritual, according to the log, had been successful. The disappearances ceased, and the town returned to a semblance of normalcy. However, the entry warned that the seal was fragile, that the darkness could return, more potent than before. Sheriff Brody, armed with this new information, sought out Mrs. Gable. The old woman, her eyes gleaming with an unsettling wisdom, confirmed the existence of the ancient ritual. "The seal," she whispered, her voice raspy, "is weakening. The darkness is growing stronger." She spoke of an ancient artifact, a relic of the original sealing, a stone imbued with the power of the elders. Legend claimed that the stone, if properly activated, could strengthen the seal, push back the encroaching darkness. But finding the stone, Mrs. Gable warned, is a dangerous task. It is hidden deep within the Whispering Woods, guarded by creatures of the night. Undeterred, Sheriff Brody, accompanied by a small group of trusted deputies, ventured into the Whispering Woods. The forest was an eerie place, the trees twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. An unnatural silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the occasional snap of a twig or the mournful hooting of an owl. As they delved deeper into the woods, the air grew colder, the shadows more profound. They encountered strange creatures, shadowy figures that flitted through the undergrowth, eyes glowing with an eerie luminescence. The deputies, their nerves frayed, began to whisper amongst themselves, their voices filled with fear. Sheriff Brody, however, remained resolute. He pushed forward, his eyes scanning the forest floor, searching for any sign of the stone. Finally, deep within the heart of the woods, they found it, a small, unassuming stone, nestled amongst the roots of an ancient oak tree. The stone was cold to the touch, radiating a strange energy that pulsed with an eerie rhythm. As Sheriff Brody reached for it, a chilling growl echoed through the woods. The creatures of the night emerged from the shadows, their eyes fixed on the stone, their movements fluid and predatory. The deputies, terrified, raised their weapons, but the creatures were too quick, too agile. They swarmed the deputies, their claws raking flesh, their teeth sinking into exposed skin. Sheriff Brody, realizing that his men were no match for these creatures, focused all his attention on the stone. He felt a surge of energy, a connection to the ancient power that resided within it. He channeled his will, his fear, his determination, into the stone, activating its dormant power. A blinding light erupted from the stone, illuminating the forest. The creatures, howling in pain, recoiled, their forms dissolving into shadows. The stone, pulsating with energy, began to hum, its light growing brighter, casting a protective aura around the sheriff and his remaining deputies. As the light subsided, the creatures vanished, leaving behind only the silence of the night. Sheriff Brody, exhausted but triumphant, clutched the stone tightly in his hand. He knew he had to return to town, to activate the seal and protect his people from the encroaching darkness. Back in town, the situation had deteriorated further. Panic had reached a fever pitch. People were barricading themselves in their homes, refusing to leave, the once vibrant community now a collection of isolated, terrified souls. Sheriff Brody, guided by Mrs. Gable, led his men to the location of the ancient seal, a hidden grotto beneath the old oak tree at the edge of town. The ground beneath their feet trembled as they approached, the air thick with a suffocating dread. Inside the grotto, they found the remnants of the ancient ritual, faded symbols etched into the stone walls, remnants of the incantations that had once held the darkness at bay. Sheriff Brody, using the stone as a conduit, began to chant the ancient incantations, his voice echoing through the grotto. The ground shook violently, and the air crackled with energy. The stone in his hand pulsed with a blinding light, illuminating the grotto in an ethereal glow. The symbols on the walls began to glow, their colors intensifying, their power surging. A low, guttural growl echoed from the depths of the earth, a chilling response to the rising power of the seal. The ground trembled violently, rocks falling from the ceiling. But the seal held. The light from the stone intensified, pushing back the encroaching darkness. The ground finally settled, the tremors subsiding. The light from the stone began to fade, and the grotto returned to its normal, albeit eerie, state. Sheriff Brody, exhausted but triumphant, knew that he had bought the town some time. The darkness, however, was not defeated. It was merely contained, waiting for the seal to weaken, waiting for the next opportunity to unleash its horrors upon the world. Sheriff Brody and his men stood guard, their eyes fixed on the grotto, their weapons ready. They knew that the battle was far from over. The darkness was always watching, always waiting for its chance to return. And as the first rays of dawn pierced the darkness, casting long shadows across the town, Sheriff Brody wondered if they had truly defeated the enemy, or merely delayed the inevitable. The whispers continued, faint at first, then growing louder, a chilling reminder that the darkness was still out there, watching, waiting, ready to strike again. The immediate threat seemed to have subsided. The tremors ceased, the eerie glow that had permeated the town faded, and a fragile sense of calm returned to Ravenswood. But the fear remained, a lingering shadow that clung to the hearts of the townsfolk. Sheriff Brody, despite his success in containing the darkness, felt a profound sense of unease. He knew that the battle was far from over. The darkness, like a wounded beast, would undoubtedly return, more cunning, more desperate. He spent the following weeks reinforcing the seal, working tirelessly to strengthen the wards, to ensure that the darkness remained imprisoned. He enlisted the help of Mrs. Gable, her knowledge of ancient lore proving invaluable. Together, they collected rare herbs and minerals, performing intricate rituals under the watchful gaze of the stars. The town, slowly but surely, began to heal. The fear, though still present, began to recede, replaced by a cautious optimism. People ventured out of their homes, the streets once again filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the chatter of neighbors. However, the darkness, as Sheriff Brody had predicted, was far from defeated. It began to manifest in subtle ways, whispers on the wind, fleeting shadows that danced in the periphery of vision. Nightmares plagued the townsfolk, visions of monstrous creatures and terrifying landscapes. Then, the disappearances began again. But this time, they were different. The victims were not simply taken, they were transformed. The first victim was young Thomas, a boy known for his kindness and compassion. He vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a chilling silence. Days later, his body was found in the woods, his eyes vacant, his skin pale and clammy. He was alive, but something was wrong. He wandered the streets, a hollow shell of his former self, his eyes devoid of life, his movements mechanical. He spoke in a monotone voice, his words devoid of emotion, repeating phrases like "the darkness consumes," and "join us." Panic erupted once more. The town, once on the verge of healing, was plunged back into chaos. The fear was no longer a distant threat, it was a tangible presence, a living nightmare that stalked the streets. Sheriff Brody, witnessing the transformation of young Thomas, realized that the darkness was evolving, becoming more insidious, more cunning. It was not merely consuming its victims, It was manipulating them, turning them into agents of its will. He knew he had to find a way to stop it, to break the curse that had fallen upon the town. He sought out Mrs. Gable, his voice filled with desperation. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice trembling. "How do we stop this?" Mrs. Gable, her eyes filled with a chilling wisdom, spoke of an ancient prophecy, a legend whispered amongst the elders. "The darkness," she rasped, "feeds on fear. It thrives on despair. The only way to defeat it is to conquer our fears, to embrace hope." Sheriff Brody, initially skeptical, began to see the wisdom in her words. The darkness, he realized, was manipulating their emotions, exploiting their fears. If they could overcome their fear, if they could find hope in the face of despair, they might be able to break the curse. He began to organize the town, encouraging the townsfolk to come together, to support each other. He organized community gatherings, where people shared stories, sang songs, and reminded themselves of the strength of the human spirit. Slowly, tentatively, the fear began to recede. People started to venture out of their homes again, their laughter filling the streets once more. The sense of community, once shattered by fear, began to mend. But the darkness continued to fight back. It whispered temptations, sowing seeds of discord, exploiting the lingering fear and paranoia. It manipulated the transformed victims, using them as pawns in its game, turning them against their friends and neighbors. Sheriff Brody, realizing that he could not fight the darkness alone, sought help from an unexpected source, the transformed victims themselves. He reasoned that if he could reach them, if he could awaken the remnants of their humanity, they might be able to break free from the darkness's control. It was a dangerous endeavor. The transformed victims were unpredictable, their movements erratic, their eyes filled with a chilling emptiness. But Sheriff Brody, driven by a desperate hope, ventured into the woods, searching for young Thomas. He found him standing alone, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon, his body swaying gently to an unseen rhythm. Sheriff Brody approached cautiously, his voice soft and soothing. "Thomas," he said gently, "can you hear me?" The boy turned slowly, his eyes vacant, his face expressionless. "The darkness consumes," he murmured, his voice a monotone drone. Sheriff Brody, remembering Mrs. Gable's words, focused on the remnants of humanity within the boy, on the kindness and compassion that had once defined him. He spoke of the boy's family, of his friends, of the joy he had brought to their lives. Slowly, tentatively, the boy's eyes began to flicker, a spark of recognition returning to their depths. He looked at Sheriff Brody, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Sheriff Brody," he whispered, his voice hoarse. I don't understand." Sheriff Brody continued to speak, his voice filled with warmth and compassion. He spoke of hope, of the strength of the human spirit, of the power of love to overcome even the darkest of shadows. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the darkness began to recede, the grip of the curse loosening its hold. The boy's eyes, once vacant, began to fill with a flicker of life, a glimmer of recognition. I remember," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I remember who I am." Sheriff Brody, overjoyed, embraced the boy, his relief palpable. He knew that this was just the beginning, a small victory in a long and arduous battle. But it was a victory nonetheless, a beacon of hope in the face of despair. The battle against the darkness continued, a slow and arduous struggle. There were setbacks, moments of despair, when it seemed as though the darkness would ultimately prevail. But Sheriff Brody and the townsfolk, strengthened by their shared experiences, refused to give in. They continued to fight, to support each other, to nurture the embers of hope that still flickered within them. They learned to live with the fear, to acknowledge its presence without allowing it to consume them. And slowly, gradually, the darkness began to recede. The whispers grew fainter, the shadows less menacing. The town, once on the brink of destruction, began to heal, stronger, more resilient than ever before. The darkness, however, was not defeated. It remained, a lurking presence, a reminder of the fragility of hope, the ever-present threat that lurked beneath the surface. But the people of Ravenswood, having faced their fears, having embraced hope, were no longer afraid. They had learned to live with the darkness, to coexist with the forces that sought to consume them. And as the years passed, the memories of the terror faded, replaced by a sense of resilience, a quiet determination to protect the fragile peace they had forged. The tunnel, once a source of fear and despair, became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers that lurked beneath the surface, a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. The darkness, though never entirely vanquished, remained dormant, a sleeping beast waiting for the right moment to awaken. But the people of Ravenswood, armed with their newfound strength, were ready. They had faced their fears, embraced hope, and emerged stronger, more resilient than ever before. And as long as they remembered the lessons of the past, as long as they clung to the fragile threads of hope, they knew that they would prevail. The initial euphoria of their victory over the immediate threat soon faded. The townsfolk, while outwardly appearing to have returned to their normal lives, carried the weight of their experiences deep within. Nightmares continued to plague them, the whispers of the darkness still echoing in their minds. Sheriff Brody, though outwardly stoic, bore the brunt of the trauma. The faces of the transformed victims, their eyes glazed over, haunted his dreams. He felt a deep sense of responsibility, not just for the safety of his town, but for the souls trapped within the clutches of the darkness. He sought solace in the company of Mrs. Gable, the old woman who had become his unlikely ally. She, too, bore the scars of the past, her eyes reflecting a lifetime of witnessing the darkness. The darkness, she rasped, her voice frail, does not truly die. It merely sleeps, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Her words echoed in Sheriff Brody's mind. He knew she was right. The battle was far from over. The darkness, like a dormant volcano, simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to erupt. He began to research ancient texts, seeking any information that might shed light on the origins of the darkness, on the creature that had unleashed this terror upon their world. He discovered a series of cryptic symbols, hidden within the pages of an ancient grimoire, symbols that seemed to correspond to the markings on the stone used to seal the tunnel. These symbols, Mrs. Gable explained, were keys, fragments of an ancient language spoken by the beings that had first encountered the darkness. Deciphering them, she warned, was a dangerous endeavor, a gamble that could unleash unforeseen consequences. But Sheriff Brody, driven by a desperate need to understand the enemy, pressed on. He spent countless hours studying the symbols, deciphering their meaning, piecing together the fragments of an ancient history. He learned that the darkness was not a singular entity, but a manifestation of a primordial force, a being of pure chaos that existed before time itself. It had been imprisoned long ago by a powerful order of mystics, their power channeled through the ancient symbols. The tunnel, he discovered, was not merely an entrance to the underworld, but a conduit, a bridge between this world and the realm of the darkness. The creature that had awakened the tunnel was merely a servant, a harbinger of the greater evil that lurked within. This knowledge filled Sheriff Brody with a chilling dread. The seal, he realized, was only a temporary measure. The darkness, like a caged beast, was growing stronger, waiting for the right moment to break free. He knew he had to find a way to permanently destroy the conduit, to sever the connection between this world and the realm of the darkness. But how? The tunnel, he realized, was deeply intertwined with the very fabric of the earth, its roots reaching deep into the heart of the planet. He sought the help of a renowned geologist, a man named Dr. Elias Thorne, a brilliant but eccentric scholar who had spent his life studying the geological formations of the region. Dr. Thorne, intrigued by Sheriff Brody's tale, agreed to help. Together, they embarked on a perilous journey, venturing deep into the earth, following the tremors that emanated from the depths of the tunnel. They discovered a network of subterranean caverns, a labyrinthine maze that stretched for miles beneath the surface. Deep within this subterranean labyrinth, they found the heart of the tunnel, a massive cavern filled with a swirling vortex of energy. The air in the cavern was thick with the stench of sulfur and decay, the temperature unbearably hot. Dr. Thorne, using his expertise in geology, devised a plan. He proposed to destabilize the cavern, to trigger a massive landslide that would seal the tunnel forever. It was a risky plan, a gamble that could have catastrophic consequences. Sheriff Brody, knowing that inaction would be even more catastrophic, agreed. They gathered a small team of volunteers, men and women hardened by their experiences with the darkness, individuals who understood the gravity of the situation. The operation was perilous. They spent weeks preparing, carefully laying explosives within the cavern, ensuring that the detonation would be contained, that the collapse would not endanger the surface. Finally, the day of the operation arrived. Sheriff Brody, his heart pounding, activated the explosives. A blinding flash of light erupted, followed by a deafening roar. The ground shook violently, the cavern trembling as if it were alive. The resulting landslide was catastrophic. The cavern collapsed, burying the entrance to the tunnel beneath tons of rock and debris. The tremors, which had plagued the town for months, ceased. The air, once heavy with the stench of decay, was now fresh and clean. The people of Ravenswood, witnessing the collapse of the cavern, erupted in cheers. They had defeated the darkness, or so they thought. But the victory was short-lived. The tremors returned, stronger than before, shaking the very foundations of the town. The ground began to crack, fissures appearing in the streets. Sheriff Brody, his heart sinking, realized that they had made a grave mistake. The collapse of the cavern had not destroyed the darkness, it had merely awakened something far more terrifying. The darkness, no longer confined to the tunnel, was now free to manifest in new and terrifying ways, its power amplified by the disruption of the natural order. The town of Ravenswood, once on the brink of destruction, now faced a new and even more terrifying threat. The darkness had evolved, adapted. It was no longer a localized threat, but a force that threatened to consume the entire world. Sheriff Brody, standing amidst the chaos, knew that the battle was far from over. The darkness, like a hydra, had grown two heads for every one they had cut off. The fight for survival had just begun. He looked up at the sky, the once clear sky now obscured by a swirling vortex of dark energy. The darkness, he realized, was no longer a threat to his town, but to the entire world. And as the ground beneath his feet continued to tremble, Sheriff Brody knew that the fate of humanity now rested on his shoulders. The battle had just begun, and he, along with the remnants of his town, were the last line of defense against the encroaching darkness. The tremors intensified, the ground heaving and groaning like a wounded beast. Buildings crumbled, cracks spiderwebbed across the streets, and a pall of fear descended upon the town. Sheriff Brody, witnessing the devastation, knew they had unleashed something far more terrifying than they had ever imagined. The darkness, no longer confined to the tunnel, was now free to manifest in new and terrifying ways. The first signs of the new manifestation appeared in the form of strange meteorological events. The sun, once a source of warmth and life, became a malevolent presence, its rays scorching the earth. Days turned into nights, the sky darkening, the stars obscured by a suffocating blanket of unnatural gloom. Then came the plagues. A strange sickness, unlike anything seen before, swept through the town, leaving its victims weak and delirious, their minds twisted and corrupted. The air itself became poisonous, filled with invisible spores that choked the life from everything they touched. The townsfolk, once united in their fight against the darkness, were now divided, consumed by fear and despair. Some succumbed to the sickness, their minds twisted and corrupted by the darkness. Others, driven by fear and paranoia, turned against each other, accusing their neighbors of being infected, of spreading the contagion. Sheriff Brody, witnessing the disintegration of his community, felt a wave of despair wash over him. He had intended to save his town, to protect his people. Instead, he had unleashed a force that threatened to consume the entire world. He sought out Mrs. Gable, hoping for guidance, for a solution to this new, more terrifying threat. But Mrs. Gable, her frail body racked with fever, could offer little comfort. "The balance," she rasped, her voice weak, "has been disrupted. The darkness, unchecked, will consume all." Sheriff Brody, desperate for answers, turned to Dr. Thorne. The geologist, his face pale and drawn, confirmed Mrs. Gable's fears. "The collapse of the tunnel," he explained, "has destabilized the tectonic plates, releasing a surge of primordial energy. This energy is fueling the darkness, amplifying its power." He spoke of ancient prophecies, of a coming age of darkness, when the veil between worlds would thin. and the forces of chaos would be unleashed upon the earth. "We must find a way to restore the balance," Dr. Thorne said, his voice filled with urgency. "We must find a way to contain the energy, to prevent it from consuming everything." Sheriff Brody, armed with this new information, knew that the fate of humanity rested on his shoulders. He had to find a way to restore the balance, to contain the primordial energy that was fueling the darkness. He began to search for ancient texts, seeking any information that might offer a solution. He delved into forgotten legends, seeking clues in the whispers of the wind, in the patterns of the stars. He discovered a hidden chamber beneath the old oak tree, a chamber that had been sealed for centuries. Inside, he found a series of ancient artifacts, relics of the original order of mystics who had first confronted the darkness. Among the artifacts was a crystal, a shimmering gem that pulsed with an inner light. According to an ancient inscription, the crystal was a conduit, a bridge to the realm of the mystics, a way to contact those who had fought the darkness in the past. Sheriff Brody, with the help of Mrs. Gable and Dr. Thorne, attempted to activate the crystal. They focused their energies, their minds, on the crystal, attempting to establish a connection with the other side. The crystal shimmered, its light intensifying, and a voice, ancient and ethereal, echoed through the chamber. "The darkness grows stronger," the voice warned. "The balance is shattered. You must find the wellspring, the source of the primordial energy." The voice faded, leaving Sheriff Brody with a chilling sense of urgency. The wellspring. He had heard whispers of it in ancient legends, a place of immense power, a source of both creation and destruction. He knew he had to find the wellspring, to confront the source of the darkness, to restore the balance before it was too late. But finding the wellspring would be a perilous journey, a journey into the unknown, a journey into the heart of the darkness itself. Sheriff Brody, armed with the knowledge of the ancient mystics, prepared for the journey. He gathered a small group of trusted companions, individuals who had proven their courage and resilience in the face of adversity. Their journey took them across treacherous landscapes, through perilous terrains, into the heart of the wilderness. They faced unimaginable dangers, from monstrous creatures to the ever-present threat of the encroaching darkness. Finally, after weeks of arduous travel, they reached their destination, a desolate wasteland, a barren expanse of scorched earth where the sun beat down with merciless intensity. In the center of this desolate landscape, they found the wellspring, a deep, swirling vortex of energy, its surface shimmering with an eerie, otherworldly light. The air around the wellspring was thick with the stench of sulfur and decay, the ground trembling beneath their feet. Sheriff Brody, his heart pounding, approached the wellspring. He felt a surge of power, a raw, untamed energy that threatened to consume him. He knew that this was the source of the darkness, the heart of the chaos that was consuming the world. He raised the crystal, its surface shimmering with an intense light. He focused his will, channeling his fear, his anger, his determination, into the crystal. The crystal resonated, its light intensifying, creating a shield against the overwhelming power of the wellspring. Sheriff Brody, guided by the wisdom of the ancient mystics, began to channel the energy, to redirect it, to restore the balance. The process was agonizing, his body racked with pain, his mind on the verge of collapse. But he persevered, his will unwavering, his determination fueled by the memory of his fallen friends, by the fear for the future of humanity. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the tremors subsided. The air, once thick with the stench of decay, began to clear. The sun, once a malevolent presence, returned to its normal radiance. The darkness, weakened, retreated, its power diminished, its grip on the world loosened. The plagues receded, the sick began to recover, and a fragile sense of peace returned to the world. Sheriff Brody, exhausted but triumphant, watched as the world began to heal. The scars of the darkness remained, but hope, once again, flickered in the hearts of humanity. He knew that the battle was far from over. The darkness, like a wounded beast, would undoubtedly return. But for now, humanity had survived. They had faced the abyss, stared into the face of oblivion, and emerged, battered but unbroken. Sheriff Brody, his mission accomplished, returned to his town, a changed man. He had faced the darkness, confronted his own mortality, and emerged a hero, a symbol of hope in a world that had forgotten how to hope. The people of Ravenswood, forever grateful for his courage and sacrifice, welcomed him back with open arms. They knew that as long as Sheriff Brody stood guard, as long as the memory of their struggle remained alive, the darkness would never truly conquer. The world had changed, forever altered by the encounter with the abyss. But humanity, scarred but resilient, had survived. They had faced the darkness, and emerged, stronger, wiser, more determined to protect the fragile beauty of their world. And as the sun set, casting long shadows across the land, Sheriff Brody looked towards the horizon, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. The darkness, he knew, would return. But so would they. They would be ready. The immediate crisis had subsided. The tremors ceased, the air cleared, and the sun, once a malevolent presence, returned to its normal radiance. The plagues that had ravaged the land began to recede, the sick slowly recovering, their minds slowly returning to their rightful owners. A fragile sense of peace, a tentative calm, settled over the ravaged world. But the scars of the darkness ran deep. The world had been irrevocably altered, the balance of nature irrevocably disrupted. The once verdant landscapes were scarred with the marks of the chaos, scorched earth, poisoned rivers, and a chilling silence where once life had thrived. Sheriff Brody, despite his victory, carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had faced the abyss, stared into the face of oblivion, and emerged scarred, but unbroken. The memories of the fallen, the faces of the transformed, haunted his dreams, a constant reminder of the fragility of life, the precariousness of existence. He knew that the darkness, like a wounded beast, would inevitably return. The battle was far from over. This was merely a temporary reprieve, a brief respite before the next onslaught. He dedicated himself to rebuilding his town, to helping his people recover from the trauma they had endured. He organized relief efforts, providing food, shelter, and medical care to those in need. He encouraged the townsfolk to come together, to support each other, to rediscover the strength of community that had been shattered by fear and despair. But the darkness continued to linger, its influence subtly permeating every aspect of their lives. Whispers of doom echoed in the wind, paranoia and distrust festered within the hearts of men, and the world, once vibrant and full of life, was now shrouded in a pall of unease. Sheriff Brody, realizing that the threat was not merely physical, but also psychological, sought to address the spiritual wounds inflicted by the darkness. He encouraged the townsfolk to reconnect with their inner strength, to rediscover their faith in humanity, to find solace in the beauty of the natural world. He organized community gatherings, where people shared stories, sang songs, and celebrated the resilience of the human spirit. He encouraged them to cultivate their gardens, to nurture their children, to find joy in the simple pleasures of life. Slowly, tentatively, the town began to heal. The fear, though still present, began to recede, replaced by a cautious optimism. The laughter of children once again filled the streets, the aroma of freshly baked bread filled the air, and the once silent town began to come alive. Sheriff Brody, however, knew that this was merely a temporary respite. The darkness, he realized, was not merely a physical entity, but a manifestation of the chaos that existed within, a reflection of the fear and despair that plagued the human heart. He began to study ancient philosophies, seeking wisdom in the teachings of mystics and sages. He learned to meditate, to quiet the turmoil within his own mind, to find inner peace amidst the chaos. He discovered that the true battle was not against the darkness outside, but against the darkness within, the fear, the anger, the despair that threatened to consume him from within. He shared his insights with the townsfolk, encouraging them to cultivate inner peace, to find strength within themselves. He taught them meditation techniques, guided them through exercises in mindfulness, and helped them to reconnect with the natural world, to find solace in the beauty of the forests, the rivers, and the stars. Slowly, the people of Ravenswood began to change. They became more compassionate, more understanding, more forgiving. They learned to appreciate the simple joys of life, to find beauty in the everyday, to cherish the connections they shared with each other. The darkness, deprived of its primary fuel, the fear and despair that consumed the human heart, began to weaken. Its influence diminished, its grip on the world loosened. But the threat remained. The darkness, like a dormant volcano, simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to erupt. Sheriff Brody, knowing that vigilance was key, continued to monitor the situation, to prepare for any eventuality. He established a network of observers, individuals with heightened senses, who could detect any signs of the darkness's resurgence. He gathered information from travelers, from scholars, from anyone who might have encountered the darkness in its various forms. He discovered that the darkness was manifesting in different ways across the globe. In some parts of the world, it manifested as political unrest, as social upheaval, as the rise of extremist ideologies. In other parts, it manifested as environmental disasters, as the rapid decline of biodiversity, as the poisoning of the earth. Sheriff Brody realized that the battle against the darkness was not merely a local struggle, but a global one. He knew that he had to share his knowledge, to warn the world of the impending threat. He traveled the world, sharing his experiences, his insights, his warnings. He spoke to world leaders, to scientists, to religious leaders, to anyone who would listen. He urged them to unite, to work together to confront the darkness, to protect the fragile balance of the planet. His message resonated with many, but not all. Some dismissed him as a madman, a relic of a bygone era. Others saw him as a threat, a purveyor of fear and paranoia. But Sheriff Brody persevered, his determination unwavering. He knew that the fate of humanity rested on their ability to unite, to overcome their differences, to work together for the common good. He established a global network of observers, a network of individuals who shared his vision, who were committed to monitoring the activities of the darkness, to sounding the alarm when necessary. He founded an organization dedicated to the study of the darkness, an organization that brought together scientists, philosophers, mystics, and spiritual leaders from around the world. They studied ancient texts, explored forgotten philosophies, and sought to understand the nature of the darkness, its origins, its weaknesses. Years passed. The world continued to face its challenges, the darkness lurking beneath the surface, ever present, ever watchful. But humanity, inspired by Sheriff Brody's example, had begun to change. They had learned to appreciate the interconnectedness of all things, to respect the delicate balance of nature. They had learned to value compassion, empathy, and cooperation. They had learned to find strength in unity, to overcome their differences, to work together for the common good. The darkness, deprived of its primary fuel, the fear, the anger, the despair that consumed the human heart, was slowly weakening. Its influence, though still present, was diminishing, its grip on the world loosening. Sheriff Brody, now an old man, watched the world evolve with a sense of quiet satisfaction. He knew that the battle was far from over. The darkness, like a dormant volcano, would always remain a threat. But humanity, armed with knowledge, with compassion, with the strength of their collective will, was finally ready to face the future. The world had changed, forever altered by the encounter with the abyss. But humanity, scarred but resilient, had survived. They had faced the darkness, confronted their own mortality, and emerged, stronger, wiser, more determined to protect the fragile beauty of their world. And as the sun set, casting long shadows across the land, Sheriff Brody looked towards the horizon, his eyes filled with a quiet sense of peace. The darkness, he knew, would always be there, a constant reminder of the fragility of existence. But humanity, finally awakened, was ready to face the future, to embrace the challenges, to protect the fragile tapestry of life. The battle, he knew, would continue, generation after generation. But humanity, armed with knowledge, with compassion, with the strength of their collective will, would prevail. They would not succumb to the darkness. They would embrace the light, nurture hope, and ensure that the darkness would never again consume the world. The years passed, and Sheriff Brody, now an old man, watched the world evolve with a mixture of pride and apprehension. The scars of the darkness remained, but the world, slowly but surely, was healing. The once ravaged landscapes were slowly regenerating, the poisoned rivers were being cleansed, and the air, once thick with the stench of decay, was once again filled with the sweet scent of life. The plagues had receded, though their memory lingered, a constant reminder of the fragility of existence. The people of Ravenswood, and indeed, the world, had learned valuable lessons. They had learned to appreciate the interconnectedness of all things, to respect the delicate balance of nature. They had learned to value compassion, empathy, and cooperation, to find strength in unity, to work together for the common good. The organization that Sheriff Brody had founded, the Guardians of the Light, had grown into a global network, a beacon of hope in a world still grappling with the aftermath of the darkness. Their mission was to monitor the world for any signs of the darkness's resurgence, to educate the public about the dangers that lurked beneath the surface, and to cultivate a new generation of individuals who could understand the ancient wisdom, the interconnectedness of all things, and the importance of preserving the delicate balance of the planet. Sheriff Brody, though his body weakened by age, remained an active member of the Guardians, his wisdom and experience invaluable to the younger generation. He spent his days mentoring young people, sharing his knowledge, passing on the lessons he had learned during his long and arduous journey. He taught them about the importance of inner peace, of cultivating a calm and centered mind, of finding strength within themselves. He encouraged them to connect with nature, to find solace in the beauty of the natural world, to listen to the whispers of the wind, to observe the dance of the stars. He reminded them that the true battle was not against an external enemy, but against the darkness within, the fear, the anger, the greed, that threatened to consume humanity from within. He taught them about the importance of compassion, of empathy, of forgiveness. He encouraged them to reach out to those in need, to offer a helping hand, to build bridges of understanding between people of different cultures and backgrounds. He emphasized the importance of education, of knowledge, of understanding the complexities of the world. He encouraged them to question everything, to seek truth, to never stop learning. The Guardians, inspired by Sheriff Brody's teachings, began to implement these principles into their daily lives. They became teachers, healers, environmentalists, activists, working tirelessly to create a better world, a world where peace and harmony prevailed. They developed new technologies, technologies that harnessed the power of nature, technologies that could heal the wounds inflicted by the darkness. They developed sustainable agriculture practices, restored damaged ecosystems, and worked to protect endangered species. They also focused on cultivating inner peace, on combating the forces of fear and despair that still lingered within the human psyche. They organized meditation retreats, mindfulness workshops, and community events that promoted healing and reconciliation. Slowly, but surely, the world began to heal. The scars of the darkness remained, but the wounds were slowly closing. The air was cleaner, the water purer, and the once ravaged landscapes were slowly regenerating. The people of the world, inspired by the example of the Guardians, began to embrace a new way of life, a life centered on compassion, cooperation, and sustainability. They learned to live in harmony with nature, to respect the delicate balance of the ecosystem, to cherish the beauty of the planet. The darkness, though never entirely vanquished, was no longer a dominant force. It lurked in the shadows, a constant reminder of the fragility of existence, but it no longer threatened to consume the world. Sheriff Brody, watching the world evolve, felt a sense of profound peace. He had faced the abyss, stared into the face of oblivion, and emerged, scarred but unbroken. He had witnessed the worst that humanity had to offer, but he had also witnessed the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. He knew that the battle was far from over. The darkness, like a dormant volcano, would always remain a threat. But humanity, armed with knowledge, with compassion, with the strength of their collective will, was finally ready to face the future. They had learned from their mistakes, they had embraced the lessons of the past, and they were determined to create a future where peace, harmony, and sustainability would prevail. Sheriff Brody, his mission accomplished, finally found peace. He passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his loved ones, his spirit at peace with the world. The people of Ravenswood, and indeed, the world, mourned his loss. But they also celebrated his life, his courage, his unwavering commitment to the cause of good. Sheriff Brody, the man who had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, had left an indelible mark on the world. His legacy would continue to inspire generations to come, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, hope can prevail, that the human spirit, though fragile, is ultimately indestructible. The darkness, though never entirely vanquished, would continue to lurk in the shadows. But humanity, armed with knowledge, with compassion, with the strength of their collective will, would continue to fight, to protect the fragile beauty of their world, to ensure that the light would always prevail. And as the sun set, casting long shadows across the land, the people of the world looked towards the future with a renewed sense of hope, knowing that the darkness, though ever present, would never again consume them. For they had learned to face their fears, to embrace the light, and to nurture the fragile spark of hope that resided within each and every one of them. The years that followed were a time of cautious optimism. The world, scarred but resilient, slowly began to heal. The whispers of the darkness, once a constant hum, faded into a distant echo. Sheriff Brody, now an old man, watched the world evolve with a mixture of pride and apprehension. He had faced the abyss, stared into the face of oblivion, and emerged, scarred but unbroken. The memories of the fallen, the faces of the transformed, haunted his dreams, a constant reminder of the fragility of existence. He knew that the darkness, like a dormant volcano, would always remain a threat. But humanity, armed with knowledge, with compassion, with the strength of their collective will, was finally ready to face the future. They had learned to live in harmony with nature, to respect the delicate balance of the ecosystem, to cherish the beauty of the planet. They had developed sustainable technologies, harnessed the power of renewable energy, and cultivated a global consciousness, a shared understanding of their interconnectedness. The Guardians of the Light, the organization Sheriff Brody had founded, had grown into a global network, a beacon of hope in a world that was slowly but surely recovering from the ravages of the darkness. Their mission was to monitor the world for any signs of the darkness's resurgence, to educate the public about the dangers that lurked beneath the surface, and to cultivate a new generation of individuals who could understand the ancient wisdom, the interconnectedness of all things, and the importance of preserving the delicate balance of the planet. Sheriff Brody, though his body weakened by age, remained an active member of the Guardians, his wisdom and experience invaluable to the younger generation. He spent his days mentoring young people, sharing his knowledge, passing on the lessons he had learned during his long and arduous journey. He taught them about the importance of inner peace, of cultivating a calm and centered mind, of finding strength within themselves. He encouraged them to connect with nature, to find solace in the beauty of the natural world, to listen to the whispers of the wind, to observe the dance of the stars. He reminded them that the true battle was not against an external enemy, but against the darkness within, the fear, the anger, the greed, that threatened to consume humanity from within. He taught them about the importance of compassion, of empathy, of forgiveness. He encouraged them to reach out to those in need, to offer a helping hand, to build bridges of understanding between people of different cultures and backgrounds. He emphasized the importance of education, of knowledge, of understanding the complexities of the world. He encouraged them to question everything, to seek truth, to never stop learning. The Guardians, inspired by Sheriff Brody's teachings, began to implement these principles into their daily lives. They became teachers, healers, environmentalists, activists, working tirelessly to create a better world, a world where peace and harmony prevailed. They developed new technologies, technologies that harnessed the power of nature, technologies that could heal the wounds inflicted by the darkness. They developed sustainable agriculture practices, restored damaged ecosystems, and worked to protect endangered species. They also focused on cultivating inner peace, on combating the forces of fear and despair that still lingered within the human psyche. They organized meditation retreats, mindfulness workshops, and community events that promoted healing and reconciliation. Slowly, but surely, the world began to heal. The scars of the darkness remained, but the wounds were slowly closing. The air was cleaner, the water purer, and the once ravaged landscapes were slowly regenerating. The people of the world, inspired by the example of the Guardians, began to embrace a new way of life, a life centered on compassion, cooperation, and sustainability. They learned to live in harmony with nature, to respect the delicate balance of the ecosystem, to cherish the beauty of the planet. The darkness, deprived of its primary fuel, the fear, the anger, the greed that consumed the human heart, was slowly weakening. Its influence, though still present, was diminishing, its grip on the world loosening. Sheriff Brody, watching the world evolve, felt a sense of profound peace. He had faced the abyss, stared into the face of oblivion, and emerged, scarred but unbroken. He had witnessed the worst that humanity had to offer, but he had also witnessed the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. He knew that the battle was far from over. The darkness, like a dormant volcano, would always remain a threat. But humanity, armed with knowledge, with compassion, with the strength of their collective will, was finally ready to face the future. They had learned from their mistakes, they had embraced the lessons of the past, and they were determined to create a future where peace, harmony, and sustainability would prevail. Sheriff Brody, his mission accomplished, finally found peace. He passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his loved ones, his spirit at peace with the world. The people of Ravenswood, and indeed, the world, mourned his loss. But they also celebrated his life, his courage, his unwavering commitment to the cause of good. Sheriff Brody, the man who had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, had left an indelible mark on the world. His legacy would continue to inspire generations to come, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, hope can prevail, that the human spirit, though fragile, is ultimately indestructible. The darkness, though never entirely vanquished, would continue to lurk in the shadows. But humanity, armed with knowledge, with compassion, with the strength of their collective will, would continue to fight, to protect the fragile beauty of their world, to ensure that the light would always prevail. And as the sun set, casting long shadows across the land, the people of the world looked towards the future with a renewed sense of hope, knowing that the darkness, though ever present, would never again consume them. For they had learned to face their fears, to embrace the light, and to nurture the fragile spark of hope that resided within each and every one of them. And so, the story of Sheriff Brody, the man who faced the darkness, came to an end. But his legacy, like the enduring light of the stars, continued to shine, a beacon of hope for generations to come, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can prevail.